Darkness, then awareness. Revan had died before. He had seen the void between life and death, had walked the paths of both Jedi and Sith. He had been a conqueror, a savior, a betrayer, and a hero. He had fallen, risen, and fallen again. But this was different. He felt the warmth of a desert sun on his skin, the coarse sensation of sand beneath his fingers. He could hear the hum of machinery, the distant chatter of voices, and the unmistakable presence of the Force, so alive, so powerful within him. He opened his eyes. He was in a small, dimly lit room, filled with junked droid parts and half-finished engines. The air smelled of oil and metal, thick with the heat of the twin suns overhead. His hands, small, fragile, but brimming with power, trembled as he raised them. These were not his hands. This was not his body. Memories flooded his mind. A boy, a mother, a slave, Tatooine. A name surfaced, Anakin Skywalker. Revan gasped, staggering backward. He knew that name, knew it from whispers in the Force, echoes of a future he had no part in. The chosen one, the one who would bring balance to the Force. But how? Why was he here? Why was he this boy? The Force around him was alive, vibrant, almost too strong for his body to contain. He could feel it pulling him, guiding him, whispering secrets he could not yet understand. He knew without a doubt that this was no accident. Someone, or something, had given him another chance. A sharp voice interrupted his thoughts. "Anakin, are you messing with the droids again?" No, Anakin turned. A short, gruff Toydarian flapped his wings irritably. Watto. Memories not his own reminded him of the name, of the slavery, of the chains that bound this body. Anakin Skywalker was a slave, but Revan was no one's servant. For the first time, since awakening, he smiled. He didn't know who had placed him here or why, but one thing was clear. The Force had given him another chance, and he would not waste it. Anakin, spent the next few days adjusting to his new reality. The memories of this life were as clear as his own, blending together like streams merging into a river. He could remember the pod races, the endless work under Watto, and the gentle warmth of his mother, Shmi Skywalker. But beneath it all, his true self remained. He was not just a boy on Tatooine. He was a warrior, a strategist, a leader who had once commanded armies and defied empires. He observed everything with new eyes. The heat of Tatooine no longer felt unbearable, merely an obstacle to overcome. The junk piles and spare droid parts weren't just debris. They were potential tools, resources that could be manipulated and used to his advantage. He studied Watto's mannerisms, his weaknesses, his greed. The Toydarian thought himself clever, but Revan had dealt with far more cunning manipulators in his past life. He knew how to handle men like him. At night, when the desert was quiet and the only sound was the distant howl of the wind, he reached out with the Force. It was intoxicating. The power that flowed through this body was unlike anything he had ever felt before. He had always been strong in the Force, but this was something else entirely. It pulsed within him, vast and limitless, begging to be wielded. He experimented carefully, moving objects with only a thought, sensing the emotions of those around him with greater clarity than ever before. Then the Jedi came. Qui-Gon Jinn was unlike the Jedi Revan had known in the past. He was not bound by blind adherence to the Council's rules. He questioned, he challenged, he thought for himself. Revan respected that, but the Jedi Master was still limited by the Order's teachings, still reluctant to embrace the true nature of the Force. The moment Qui-Gon tested his blood and spoke of his unprecedented midi-chlorian count, Revan knew he had an opportunity. The Jedi were interested in him. They saw his power, but would they accept what he was? The Bunta Eve Classic was not a challenge for someone like him. The Force guided his every move, his instincts sharpened by 2 lifetimes of battle and survival. He maneuvered the pod with a precision that even the original Anakin had lacked, unburdened by fear or hesitation. When he crossed the finish line, he did not celebrate. He only calculated his next move. When Qui-Gon told him he was free, a strange feeling settled within him. Freedom, true freedom, something Anakin Skywalker had never known. But Revan had been free before. He had shaped his own destiny once, and he would do so again. Shmi's goodbye was difficult, but he understood sacrifice better than most. Love, attachment, these things made men weak, made them vulnerable. He had learned that lesson before, and he would not repeat his past mistakes. As he boarded the ship and left Tatooine behind, he felt no regret. He was stepping into the wider galaxy once more. This time, he would not be a pawn of the Jedi or the Sith. This time, he would carve his own path. The voyage to Coruscant was quiet, but Revan's mind was anything but. He observed everything, the way Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi spoke, the way Padme Amidala carried herself with regal authority, the underlying tension in every decision they made. He could sense their emotions, their fears, their hopes. He saw the pieces of a greater game shifting into place. The Jedi were wary of change. The Republic was crumbling under the weight of its own corruption. War was brewing beneath the surface, and no one seemed willing to stop it. It was a familiar sight. He had seen this before. Civilizations on the brink, leaders too blind or arrogant to see their own demise approaching. But he was no longer a man standing at the edge of history. He was in its center now, a boy with the power to reshape everything. When they arrived at the Jedi Temple, the Council examined him with cautious eyes. Masters Yoda, Mace Windu, Ki-Adi-Mundi, great warriors, wise leaders, but bound by tradition. They questioned him, tested him, and in their uncertainty they hesitated. His attachment to his mother concerned them. His emotions were strong, his power even stronger. He could see their doubt, but also their fear. They had never encountered someone like him before, but Qui-Gon argued for him. He saw Anakin as the chosen one, the one who would bring balance to the Force. Revan had no such illusions. He did not believe in prophecy. He believed in action, in choice, in will. He had once led armies against the darkness, only to become the very thing he fought against. He had seen the truth of the Force. It was neither light nor dark, neither Jedi nor Sith. It was power, infinite and raw, waiting to be shaped by those strong enough to wield it. The Council denied Qui-Gon's request to train him, but it did not matter. Fate had a way of pushing events forward. The invasion of Naboo changed everything. The Jedi had no choice but to allow him to remain with Qui-Gon. Events unfolded much as he remembered from the fragmented echoes of this timeline. The battle, the duel with Darth Maul, Qui-Gon's death. But there was a difference. When Maul struck Qui-Gon down, something stirred within Revan. He had seen death countless times, had watched comrades and enemies alike fall in battle. But this was different. This was a man who had believed in him, who had fought for him. In that moment he felt something old, something familiar, rage. He did not hesitate. As Obi-Wan clashed with Maul, Revan reached out with the Force. Not in desperation, not in fear, but in cold, calculated intent. He pulled. The Sith warrior stumbled, his balance momentarily lost, and Obi-Wan took the advantage. The duel ended the same way, but Revan had chosen to intervene. When the battle was over and Qui-Gon lay dying, his last request was the same, to train Anakin. Obi-Wan, bound by duty and honor, agreed. Revan could only watch in silence. He had altered the course of history with a single thought, and it was only the beginning. The Jedi Temple became his new home, but Revan did not see it as such. To the other Padawans, it was a sanctuary, a place of peace and learning. To him, it was a prison disguised as wisdom. The teachings of the Jedi were rigid, bound by rules that denied reality itself. They preached serenity, but demanded obedience. They warned against passion, but sought to control power. Revan had lived through such contradictions before. The Jedi had not changed in thousands of years, and their stagnation had led to their downfall once before. He suspected it would again. Obi-Wan Kenobi was a competent teacher, but he was not Qui-Gon. Where his fallen master had questioned the Jedi code, Obi-Wan followed it without hesitation. He was disciplined, honorable, and strong, but he did not understand the flaws in the order he served. He taught Anakin patience, control, and balance, but Revan already possessed these things in ways his master could never comprehend. He played the role of the eager student well. He practiced his lightsaber forms with precision, surpassing most Padawans his age. He meditated when required, though he found little use in the Jedi's attempts to suppress emotions rather than understand them. He studied their history, already knowing more than the masters who taught it. But what intrigued him most was the politics of the galaxy. The Republic was failing, corruption was everywhere, hidden beneath the guise of bureaucracy. The Jedi served the Senate, but the Senate was weak, a dying beast, strangled by its own greed. Even the war with the Separatists had not yet begun, but Revan could see its inevitability. The Sith were not just lurking in the shadows, they were winning, and yet the Jedi refused to see it. One day, he was summoned to meet Chancellor Palpatine. He had studied the man from afar, recognizing the brilliance behind his kindly facade. The Sith Lord played his role well, a master manipulator, a spider at the center of a vast web. But Revan had seen men like him before. Palpatine greeted him with warmth, with words of encouragement and praise. He spoke of Anakin's potential, of his future. He planted seeds of doubt in subtle ways, questioning whether the Jedi truly understood him. It was a masterful performance. But Revan was not a child. He was not the naive boy Palpatine expected him to be. He played along. He responded humbly, respectfully, all while studying the man who would one day transform the Republic into an empire. He let Palpatine believe his words were taking root, let him think he was slowly swaying him toward his side. In truth, Revan was doing the same. The Sith had a plan. But now, so did he. The war was coming. The Jedi were blind to it. The Sith sought to control it. Revan would shape it. The Clone Wars erupted like a wildfire, spreading chaos and destruction across the galaxy. The Jedi, despite their wisdom, had allowed themselves to become generals in a war they did not control. The Republic's armies, led by warriors who once swore themselves to peace, now waged battle on a scale unseen for centuries. The Sith had orchestrated it masterfully, ensuring that both sides were puppets in a greater game. Revan had been in wars before. He had fought Mandalorians, Sith Lords, and Republic forces alike. But this was different. The Jedi were unprepared. For large-scale conflict, their tactics outdated, their philosophy ill-suited for war. They still clung to the illusion that they were peacekeepers rather than soldiers. But Revan had no such delusions. His campaigns as a Jedi general quickly became legendary. Unlike his fellow Jedi, who often hesitated in the face of brutal reality, he embraced the necessity of war. He studied the Separatists, their weaknesses, their strengths. He experimented with strategies the Jedi would never consider: deception, psychological warfare, preemptive strikes. He was ruthless when he needed to be, but not reckless. His clones trusted him, respected him in ways many Jedi never earned. He also understood something the Jedi refused to acknowledge. Attachment was not weakness. The clones were more than soldiers. They were individuals, men who had no future beyond war. While the Jedi treated them as tools of the Republic, Revan saw them as something more. He forged bonds with them, learning their names, their fears, their ambitions. He knew loyalty was built on trust, not on orders. His men would die for him, not because they were commanded to, but because they believed in him. Obi-Wan remained his master, but their dynamic had changed. Revan no longer needed him for guidance. If anything, he saw Obi-Wan's struggles with the war, the doubt in his eyes every time he was forced to lead men to their deaths. Obi-Wan still clung to the Jedi way, to the ideals of peace and diplomacy, but war had no room for such illusions. Revan also kept a close eye on Palpatine. The Chancellor's influence over the Senate grew stronger by the day, his power consolidating, in ways no one dared question. He continued to speak with Anakin, always so understanding, so supportive, carefully pushing him further toward mistrust of the Jedi. But Revan played his own game. He let Palpatine believe he was being swayed, carefully choosing his words to suggest that doubt was taking root. He knew the Sith Lord was waiting for the right moment, for the day Anakin Skywalker would finally turn against the Jedi. But Revan would not be turned. He would control the game. The Jedi could not see the darkness creeping closer. The war was only a distraction. The real battle was coming, and Revan would be ready. The war dragged on, each battle pushing the galaxy closer to the edge. Revan continued to play his role, winning victories for the Republic while carefully maneuvering through the tangled web of politics and deception. The Jedi still refused to see what was coming. They placed their trust in a Republic that was already doomed, in a government that had surrendered itself to fear and control. Palpatine watched him closely. The Sith Lord knew Anakin Skywalker was key to his plans, but Revan was no fool. Every conversation with the Chancellor was a test, a duel of words and intentions. Palpatine spoke of the Jedi's failures, their hypocrisies, their fear of Anakin's power. He promised knowledge, strength, the freedom to wield the Force without restriction. Revan let him speak. Let him believe that his words were taking root. But Revan had already decided his path. The dark side did not tempt him. He had walked that road before, had seen what lay at its end. He had once believed that power alone could shape the galaxy, that the Sith's strength was the only way to bring order. But he had been wrong. Power without purpose was nothing. Strength without wisdom was destruction. And the Jedi? They were not innocent either. Their blindness, their refusal to evolve, had doomed them before and would doom them again. Neither the Jedi nor the Sith held the true answer. Revan would not become Vader. He would not become Sidious's pawn. But neither would he cling to the failing ideals of the Jedi. He would forge a new path, and then, at last, it came, the moment that would decide the fate of everything. Coruscant was under attack. General Grievous had launched a daring strike against the capital, capturing Chancellor Palpatine. The Republic was in chaos. The Jedi scrambled to respond, sending their greatest warriors to retrieve their leader. Revan had already anticipated this. The battle in space was brutal, but he and Obi-Wan carved their way through the separatist defenses, boarding Grievous's flagship to rescue the Chancellor. The fight with Count Dooku came as expected, but this time Revan did not hesitate. He did not need Palpatine's whispers to tell him what needed to be done. Dooku was dangerous, a Sith Lord who had already played his part in the greater plan. He would not be allowed to escape. When the duel ended, Revan stood over Dooku's fallen form. The Sith Lord looked up at him, realization dawning in his eyes. Palpatine's voice came, urging Anakin to kill him, to do what was necessary. Revan did not hesitate. He struck the final blow. Not because Palpatine commanded it, not because of hatred or vengeance, but because Dooku was a threat, and threats were to be eliminated. Palpatine's approval was clear in his eyes, but Revan was not his apprentice. He was his rival. The war was nearing its end. The final move was approaching, and Revan would decide how the game was played. The galaxy trembled on the edge of disaster. The war was nearly won, but the Republic had already lost. The Jedi believed they were approaching victory, but Revan knew better. The real battle was not fought in the Outer Rim or on the battlefields of distant worlds. It was happening in the shadows, in whispered conversations, in the careful manipulation of events. He watched as Palpatine's grip on power tightened. Emergency powers became permanent. The Senate, once a bloated but functional machine, now existed only to validate the Chancellor's decisions. The Jedi, sensing the darkness creeping closer, finally began to act. But it was too late. Mace, Windu and the Council had never fully trusted him, but they no longer hid their concerns. They whispered among themselves, debated whether the war had corrupted the Republic beyond salvation. Yoda, wise as he was, could sense the disturbance in the Force, but refused to acknowledge its true source. And then the truth was revealed. Anakin was summoned before the Council not as a Jedi, but as a tool. They asked him to spy on Palpatine, to betray the man who had guided him for years. The irony was bitter. If they had trusted him before, had truly trained him rather than restrained him, they would not have needed such desperate measures. He played his part, he agreed, but he knew that the time for pretending was over. That night, he stood before Palpatine in his private chambers, watching as the Sith Lord finally dropped the last of his masks. The Sith Master did not need to convince him to betray the Jedi. He did not speak of hatred or revenge. He spoke of power, of the failure of the Jedi Order, of the endless cycle of war and weakness. And Revan listened. Then he did what no one expected. He laughed. Palpatine's golden eyes narrowed. This was not the reaction he had anticipated. He had spent years shaping Anakin Skywalker, molding him into the perfect apprentice. But Revan was not Anakin. "You think you've won," Revan said, shaking his head. "You believe that by revealing yourself, you control the outcome." He took a step forward, meeting the Sith Lord's gaze. "But you have miscalculated." Palpatine's expression darkened. "You are strong, Anakin, but you are still young. Do not mistake knowledge for wisdom." "Knowledge is what makes this moment possible," Revan countered. "I have seen this before. I have lived this before. You are not the first Sith Lord to believe they have mastered the galaxy." Palpatine's fingers twitched. For the first time, he sensed it. Something ancient, something far older than even himself, lurking within the man he had thought he controlled. Revan smiled. "I am not your apprentice. I am your enemy." Palpatine's attack came instantly, but Revan had anticipated it. The room exploded with lightning, darkness crackling through the air, but Revan was ready. He had fought Sith Lords before, true Sith Lords, warriors and conquerors who had shaped history. Palpatine was powerful, but he was not invincible. There, battle tore through the chamber, lightsabers clashing, the Force bending around them. The Sith Lord fought with all his strength, his rage fueling his strikes. But Revan did not fight with rage. He fought with purpose. Palpatine had spent years manipulating Anakin Skywalker, but he had never accounted for the mind of Revan. The Sith Lord's strength began to wane. He had expected a blind warrior, a reckless brute consumed by emotion. Instead, he faced a strategist, a master of war. Then the moment came. The Jedi arrived. Mace Windu and his warriors burst into the room, witnessing the impossible. Palpatine, weakened, his deception exposed. Revan turned to Windu, his lightsaber still raised. "The Sith have ruled from the shadows long enough," he said. "End this." For the first time in his life, Mace Windu hesitated. Palpatine saw the opening and struck. But Revan was faster. Before the Sith Lord could unleash his final attack, Revan's blade found its mark. A precise strike, not out of anger, not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. Darth Sidious fell. The war had ended. But the real battle was only beginning. The galaxy was silent. The war had ended with a single stroke of a lightsaber, yet the echoes of battle still reverberated through the Force. Palpatine was dead. The Sith Lord, who had orchestrated the Clone Wars, manipulated the Republic, and nearly destroyed the Jedi, was no more. But victory was not without consequence. The Jedi Council stood in shock, their greatest enemy slain not by one of their own, but by Anakin Skywalker, by the boy they had never fully trusted. Mace Windu, ever the pragmatist, was the first to speak. He demanded answers. How had Anakin known Palpatine's true identity? How had he grown powerful enough to defeat him? Revan chose his words carefully. "I have seen what happens when the Sith are left unchecked," he said. "I knew the Jedi would hesitate. I acted because it was necessary." The Council's reaction was divided. Some saw him as a hero. Others saw him as dangerous. Yoda, wise as ever, studied him with knowing eyes. He sensed it, the difference. This was not Anakin Skywalker, as they had known him. This was something else. And then Order 66 was issued. Not by Palpatine, but by those who had unknowingly become his heirs. The Republic, now free from Sith influence, still feared the Jedi. The Senate, weakened and desperate, saw the Jedi as a threat to stability. Clones across the galaxy hesitated, but for only a moment. Orders were orders. The purge began. Revan did not grieve. He had seen the destruction of the Jedi before. He had watched them fall to their own arrogance, had seen their temples burn under the might of a Sith empire. This was no different. The Jedi had failed, not because of Palpatine, but because they had refused to evolve. He refused to die with them. With his loyal clone battalion, he fought his way out of the Jedi Temple, cutting through those who sought to destroy him. He knew Obi-Wan would escape, knew Yoda would go into hiding. The old ways would survive, just barely. But Revan had no interest in hiding. The Republic was dead. The Jedi were finished. The Sith had been vanquished. The galaxy stood at the brink of chaos, uncertain of what was to come next, and that was his opportunity. He vanished from history that night, slipping into the stars while the galaxy burned. Some say he became a warlord, forging a new empire from the ashes of the old. Others believe he sought out knowledge, vanishing into the unknown regions in search of something greater. But the truth was that Revan had already shaped the galaxy once before. And now, with history shattered and rewritten, he would do so again. This time, on his terms. The galaxy did not rest. Even with Palpatine dead, the war had left scars that would not heal easily. The Senate, desperate to maintain order, rebranded itself as the Galactic Union, a republic in name, but an empire in practice. The Jedi, now scattered and broken, were labeled dangerous radicals. They were hunted, not by the Sith, but by the very government they once served. But Anakin Skywalker, no, Revan, was different. He had not fled into exile like Yoda. He had not gone into hiding like Obi-Wan. He had disappeared, leaving behind only a trail of unanswered questions. The Senate feared him. The surviving Jedi resented him. The clones who had once followed him whispered of his power, unsure whether to see him as a hero or a traitor. And so the hunt began. The new Chancellor, Bail Organa, was not a tyrant, but he feared instability. He could not allow a figure as powerful as Revan to roam free. He assigned the best trackers, the greatest spies, the most dangerous bounty hunters to find him. None returned. In the Outer Rim, rumors spread of a warlord amassing power. A fleet of stolen Republic ships, a legion of rogue clones who refused to obey Order 66. Planets untouched by the Republic's rule whispered a name in the dark. Revan had returned. On Coruscant, Obi-Wan Kenobi sat alone in the ruins of the Jedi Temple, meditating. He had felt it through the Force, Anakin's presence, distant yet unwavering. Not lost, not broken, but waiting. He opened his eyes. The galaxy had not seen the last of him. The Outer Rim had always been a place of lawlessness, a frontier where the Republic's influence barely reached. Now, it became something else. Revan Anakin had not vanished into exile. He had been building. In the shadows of forgotten worlds and abandoned battlefields, he forged something new. The war had left entire fleets without commanders, legions of clones without orders, and planets without leadership. He gathered them, not through promises of peace, but with the truth that the galaxy was broken, and neither the Republic nor the Jedi could fix it. The people did not need politicians. They did not need fragile ideals. They needed strength. They needed order. At first, they were remnants, a handful of clones, a few battle-damaged ships, but they grew. More soldiers defected, unwilling to serve a government that had betrayed them. Entire planets pledged loyalty, desperate for protection in a chaotic galaxy. Within months, Revan controlled a force that rivaled what remained of the Republic's fleet, and he had no intention of hiding anymore. His forces moved swiftly, seizing key hyperspace lanes, securing resources, expanding their influence without mercy. They were not an empire in name, but in function. Those who opposed them were removed. Pirates, slavers, corrupt warlords, none were given the luxury of negotiations. The galaxy had spent too long waiting for heroes. Revan had no use for heroes. On Coruscant, the Senate panicked. Bail Organa, now forced to lead a republic he could barely hold together, feared what he had unleashed. The Jedi, already crippled, did not know whether to see Revan as an enemy or a necessary evil. Obi-Wan felt it in the Force, the shift, the growing presence of something neither light nor dark, but something far more dangerous. Revan was no longer playing by the rules of Jedi or Sith. He was creating something new, and the galaxy would either follow him or be crushed beneath him. The galaxy had known war for years, but this was something different. The Republic, barely holding together under Bail Organa's leadership, now faced an enemy they could not define. Revan's forces moved with precision, their tactics unpredictable, their loyalty unshakable. They were not invaders, not conquerors. They were something far more dangerous. They were believers. For many, Revan was a savior. For others, he was a tyrant. But there was no denying that his vision was effective. The Outer Rim, once plagued by crime and chaos, now operated under strict discipline. Smugglers vanished. Warlords were wiped out. The Republic called it oppression. Those under his rule called it order. But power, no matter how absolute, never went unchallenged. From the shadows, a new enemy emerged. A Sith order, one that had been lurking beneath the surface even before Palpatine's death, now revealed itself. They had watched as the Republic collapsed, as the Jedi scattered, as Revan took his first steps toward domination, and now they moved against him. Their leader was unknown, a figure who had never stood in the light of galactic history. He did not claim the title of Darth, nor did he follow the old traditions. He was something older, something deeper, a remnant of a past even Revan barely remembered. The Sith did not challenge Revan openly. They struck from the darkness, infiltrating his ranks, whispering to his commanders, turning his own men against him. They did not seek a throne. They sought corruption. Revan had fought Sith before. He had defeated them, become one, forsaken them. But this time, it was different. This time, they were not fighting for conquest. They were fighting for him, whispers in the Force, visions of the past, a presence that should not exist. Revan stood on the bridge of his warship, staring out into the void. He had changed the galaxy. He had reshaped its future, but the darkness had returned, and it was calling his name. The Sith came like ghosts, striking from the void, unseen yet undeniable. They did not wage war as armies did. They did not seek to destroy Revan's empire. Instead, they poisoned it from within. His commanders began to doubt. His soldiers whispered, of shadows that moved unseen. The Force itself felt wrong, as if something ancient and familiar had awakened. And then they revealed themselves. On the barren world of Malachor, where the echoes of an old war still tainted the ground, Revan stood face to face with his true enemy. A man wrapped in black armor, his presence thick with the dark side, yet controlled, not consumed. His voice was calm, almost reverent. "You were always meant to return," the Sith Lord said. "The cycle cannot be broken. The Force will not allow it." Revan understood then. This was not just another Sith. This was a remnant of something far greater. Something that had been watching him long before he had even become Anakin Skywalker. The Sith did not seek to destroy him. They sought to reclaim him. The duel was inevitable. The ground cracked beneath their battle, the dark side clashing against Revan's will. But this was not just a fight for survival. It was a fight for control. Visions burned through his mind. Memories of past lives, of past failures. He saw himself as a conqueror, as a savior, as a monster. He saw the galaxy fall and rise, only to fall again. He saw the truth. The Jedi were wrong. The Sith were wrong. The Force did not want balance. It did not want peace. It wanted conflict. Endless war, endless struggle, an eternal cycle with no escape. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, Revan had a choice. He could embrace it, become what the Sith wanted, what the Force itself seemed to demand. He could rule as he once had, shaping the galaxy through power alone, or he could reject it, break the cycle, no matter the cost. His lightsaber burned in his grip, the Sith Lord kneeling before him, waiting, expecting him to take his rightful place. Revan exhaled. And then he made his decision. The galaxy would not be bound by the past, not by the Jedi, not by the Sith, not even by the Force itself. With a single strike, the duel ended. The Sith fell, not to rage, not to vengeance, but to purpose. The darkness recoiled, the whispers faded, the cycle was shattered. Revan stood alone, not as a Jedi, not as a Sith, not as a pawn of destiny, but as something new, and the galaxy, for the first time in thousands of years, was truly free.